Thomas Becket December 29, 1170, was Archbishop of Canterbury from 1162 until his murder in 1170. He is venerated as a saint and martyr by both the Catholic Church and the Anglican Communion. He engaged in conflict with Henry II of England over the rights and privileges of the Church and was murdered by followers of the King in Canterbury Cathedral. Soon after his death, he was canonized by Pope Alexander III. Sources: the main sources for the life of Becket are a number of biographies that were written by contemporaries. A few of these documents are by unknown writers, although traditional historiography has given them names. The known biographers are John of Salisbury, Edward Grimm, Benedict of Peterborough, William of Canterbury, William Fitzstephen, Quins of Pont St Maxence, Robert of Cricklade, Alan of Tewkesbury, Benet of St Albans, and Herbert of Bosham. The other biographers, who remain anonymous, are generally given the pseudonyms of Anonymous I, Anonymous II, and Anonymous III. Besides these accounts, there are also two other accounts that are likely contemporary that appear in the Quadrilogus II and the Thecubed Massaga Archibiskups. Besides these biographies, there is also the mention of the events of Becket's life in the chroniclers of the time. These include Robert of Torrignay's work, Roger of Howden's Gesta Regis in Resi Secundi and Chronica, Ralph de Cito's works, William of Newburgh's Historia Rerum, and Gervase of Canterbury's works. Early life. Becket was born about 1118, or in 1120 according to later tradition. He was born in Cheapside, London, on December 21, which was the feast day of Saint Thomas the Apostle. He was the son of Gilbert Becket and Gilbert's wife Matilda. Gilbert's father was from Thierville in the lordship of Brian in Normandy, and was either a small landowner or a petty knight. Matilda was also of Norman ancestry, and her family may have originated near Caen. Gilbert was perhaps related to Theobald of Bec, whose family also was from Thierville. Gilbert began his life as a merchant, perhaps as a textile merchant, but by the 1120s he was living in London and was a property owner, living on the rental income from his properties. He also served as the sheriff of the city at some point. They were buried in Old St. Paul's Cathedral. One of Becket's father's rich friends, Richard de Legal, often invited Thomas to his estates in Sussex where Becket was exposed to hunting and hawking. According to Grimm, Becket learned much from Richard. Richard was later a signatory at the constitutions of Clarendon against Thomas. Beginning when he was 10, Becket was sent as a student to Merton Priory in England and later attended a grammar school in London, perhaps the one at St Paul's Cathedral. He did not study any subjects beyond the trivium and quadrivium at these schools. Later, he spent about a year in Paris around age 20. He did not, however, study canon or civil law at this time and his Latin skill always remained somewhat rudimentary. Sometime after Becket began his schooling, Gilbert Becket suffered financial reverses, and the younger Becket was forced to earn a living as a clerk. Gilbert first secured a place for his son in the business of a relative Osbert Huet de Neers, and then later Becket acquired a position in the household of Theobald of Bec, by now the Archbishop of Canterbury. Theobald entrusted him with several important missions to Rome and also sent him to Bologna and Auxerre to study canon law. Theobald in 1154 named Becket Archdeacon of Canterbury, and other ecclesiastical offices included a number of benefices, prebends at Lincoln Cathedral and St Paul's Cathedral, and the office of Provost of Beverley. His efficiency in those posts led to Theobald recommending him to King Henry II for the vacant post of Lord Chancellor, to which Becket was appointed in January 1155. As Chancellor, Becket enforced the king's traditional sources of revenue that were exacted from all landowners, including churches and bishoprics. King Henry even sent his son Henry to live in Becket's household, it being the custom then for noble children to be fostered out to other noble houses. The younger Henry was reported to have said Becket showed him more fatherly love in a day than his father did for his entire life. An emotional attachment to Becket as a foster father may have been one of the reasons the younger Henry would turn against his father. Primacy. Becket was nominated as Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162, several months after the death of Theobald. His election was confirmed on May 23, 1162 by a royal council of bishops and noblemen. Henry may have hoped that Becket would continue to put the royal government first, rather than that of the Church. The famous transformation of Becket into an ascetic occurred at this time. Becket enthroned as Archbishop of Canterbury from a Nottingham alabaster in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Becket was ordained a priest on June 2, 1162 at Canterbury, and on June 3, 1162 was consecrated as Archbishop by Henry of Blois, the Bishop of Winchester and the other suffragan bishops of Canterbury. A rift grew between Henry and Becket as the new archbishop resigned his chancellorship and sought to recover and extend the rights of the archbishopric. This led to a series of conflicts with the king, including that over the jurisdiction of secular courts over English clergymen, which accelerated antipathy between Becket and the king. Attempts by King Henry to influence the other bishops against Becket began in Westminster in October 1163, where the king sought approval of the traditional rights of the royal government in regard to the church. This led to Clarendon, where Becket was officially asked to sign off on the king's rights or face political repercussions. The Constitutions of Clarendon. King Henry II presided over the assemblies of most of the higher English clergy at Clarendon Palace on January 30, 1164. In 16 constitutions, he sought less clerical independence and a weaker connection with Rome. He employed all his skills to induce their consent and was apparently successful with all but Becket. Finally, even Becket expressed his willingness to agree to the substance of the Constitutions of Clarendon, but he still refused to formally sign the documents. Henry summoned Becket to appear before a great council at Northampton Castle on October 8, 1164, to answer allegations of contempt of royal authority and malfeasance in the Chancellor's office. Convicted on the charges, Becket stormed out of the trial and fled to the Continent. Henry pursued the fugitive archbishop with a series of edicts, aimed at all his friends and supporters as well as Becket himself. But King Louis VII of France offered Becket protection. He spent nearly 2 years in the Cistercian Abbey of Pontigny, until Henry's threats against the order obliged him to return to Sens. Becket fought back by threatening excommunication and interdict against the king and bishops in the kingdom, but Pope Alexander III, though sympathizing with him in theory, favored a more diplomatic approach. Papal legates were sent in 1167 with authority to act as arbitrators. In 1170, Alexander sent delegates to impose a solution to the dispute. At that point, Henry offered a compromise that would allow Thomas to return to England from exile. Assassination. In June 1170, Roger de Pontellier-Permelvarque, the Archbishop of York, along with Gilbert Folliot, the Bishop of London, and Jocelyn de Beaujon, the Bishop of Salisbury, crowned the heir apparent, Henry the young king, at York. This was a breach of Canterbury's privilege of coronation, and in November 1170 Becket excommunicated all three. While the three clergymen fled to the king in Normandy, Becket continued to excommunicate his opponents in the church, the news of which also reached Henry. Upon hearing reports of Becket's actions, Henry is said to have uttered words that were interpreted by his men as wishing Becket killed. The king's exact words are in doubt and several versions have been reported. The most commonly quoted, as handed down by oral tradition, is "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" But according to historian Simon Sharma this is incorrect. He accepts the account of the contemporary biographer Edward Grimm, writing in Latin, who gives us, "What miserable drones and traitors have I nourished and brought up in my household, who let their lord be treated with such shameful contempt by a low-born cleric." Many variations have found their way into popular culture. Whatever Henry said, it was interpreted as a royal command, and 4 knights, Reginald Fitzurse, Hugh de Morville, William de Tracy, and Richard le Breton, set out to confront the Archbishop of Canterbury. On December 29, 1170 they arrived at Canterbury. According to accounts left by the monk of Ars of Canterbury and eyewitness Edward Grimm, they placed their weapons under a tree outside the cathedral and hid their mail armour under cloaks before entering to challenge Becket. The knights informed Becket he was to go to Winchester to give an account of his actions, but Becket refused. It was not until Becket refused their demands to submit to the king's will that they retrieved their weapons and rushed back inside for the killing. Becket, meanwhile, proceeded to the main hall for vespers. The 4 knights, wielding drawn swords, caught up with him in a spot near a door to the monastic cloister, the stairs into the crypt, and the stairs leading up into the choir of the cathedral, where the monks were chanting vespers. Several contemporary accounts of what happened next exist. Of particular note is that of Edward Grimm, who was himself wounded in the attack. This is part of the account from Edward Grimm. The wicked knight leapt suddenly upon him, cutting off the top of the crown which the unction of sacred chrism had dedicated to God. Next he received a second blow on the head, but still he stood firm and immovable. At the third blow he fell on his knees and elbows, offering himself a living sacrifice, and saying in a low voice, "For the name of Jesus and the protection of the Church, I am ready to embrace death." But the third knight inflicted a terrible wound as he lay prostrate. By this stroke, the crown of his head was separated from the head in such a way that the blood white with the brain, and the brain no less red from the blood, dyed the floor of the cathedral. The same clerk who had entered with the knights placed his foot on the neck of the holy priest and precious martyr, and, horrible to relate, scattered the brains and blood about the pavements, crying to the others, "Let us away, knights. This fellow will arise no more." Aftermath. Following Becket's death, the monks prepared his body for burial. According to some accounts, it was discovered that Becket had worn a hair shirt under his archbishop's garments, a sign of penance. Soon after, the faithful throughout Europe began venerating Becket as a martyr, and on February 21, 1173, a little more than 2 years after his death, he was canonized by Pope Alexander III in St. Peter's Church in Senai. On July 12, 1174, in the midst of the revolt of 1173, 1174, Henry humbled himself with public penance at Becket's tomb as well as at the Church of St. Dunstan's, which became one of the most popular pilgrimage sites in England. In 1173, Becket's sister Mary was appointed as abbess of Barking Abbey as reparation for the murder of her brother. Becket's assassins fled north to Knaresborough Castle, which was held by Hugh de Morville, where they remained for about a year. De Morville held property in Cumbria, and this may also have provided a convenient bolt hole, as the men prepared for a longer stay in the separate Kingdom of Scotland. They were not arrested and neither did Henry confiscate their lands, but he failed to help them when they sought his advice in August 1171. Pope Alexander excommunicated all four. Seeking forgiveness, the assassins travelled to Rome and were ordered by the Pope to serve as knights in the Holy Lands for a period of 14 years. This last also inspired Knights of Saint Thomas, incorporated in 1191 at Acre, and which was to be modelled on the Teutonic Knights. It is the only military order native to England, like the Gilbertine Order being the only monastic order native to England as well. Nevertheless, Henry VIII dissolved both of these English institutions upon passing the Reformation, rather than merging foreign orders with them and nationalising them as elements of the Protestant Church of England. The monks were afraid that Becket's body might be stolen. To prevent this, Becket's remains were placed beneath the floor of the eastern crypt of the cathedral. A stone cover was placed over the burial place with 2 holes where pilgrims could insert their heads and kiss the tomb. This arrangement is illustrated in the miracle windows of the Trinity Chapel. A guard chamber had a clear view of the grave. In 1220, Becket's bones were moved to a new gold-plated and bejeweled shrine behind the high altar in the Trinity Chapel. The shrine was supported by 3 pairs of pillars, placed on a raised platform with 3 steps. This is also illustrated in one of the miracle windows. Canterbury, because of its religious history, had always seen a large number of pilgrims. However, after the death of Thomas Becket, the number of pilgrims visiting the city rose rapidly. Cult in the Middle Ages. On July 7, 1220, in the Jubilee year of his death, Becket's remains were relocated from this first tomb to a shrine, in the recently completed Trinity Chapel. This act of translation was one of the great symbolic events in the life of the medieval English Church and was attended by King Henry III of England, the papal legate, the Archbishop of Canterbury Stephen Langton, and large numbers of dignitaries and magnates secular and ecclesiastical. Thus a major new feast day was instituted, commemorating the translation, that was celebrated each July almost everywhere in England and also in many French churches. This feast was suppressed in 1536 at the Reformation. The shrine stood until it was destroyed in 1538, during the dissolution of the monasteries, on orders from King Henry VIII. The king also destroyed Becket's bones and ordered that all mention of his name be obliterated. The pavement where the shrine stood is today marked by a litre candle. As the scion of the leading mercantile dynasty of later centuries, Mercers, Becket was very much regarded as a Londoner by the citizens and was adopted as London's co-patron saint with St. Paul. Both their images appeared on the seals of the city and of the Lord Mayor. The Bridge House estate seal used only the image of Becket, while the reverse featured a depiction of his martyrdom. Local legends regarding Becket arose after his canonization. Though they are typical hagiographical stories, they also display Becket's particular gruffness. Becket's Well, in Utford, Kent, is said to have been created after Becket had become displeased with the taste of the local water. 2 springs of clear water are said to have bubbled up after he struck the ground with his crosier. The absence of nightingales in Utford is also ascribed to Becket, who is said to have been so disturbed in his devotions by the song of a nightingale that he commanded that none should sing in the town ever again. In the town of Stroud, also in Kent, Becket is said to have caused the inhabitants of the town and their descendants to be born with tails. The men of Stroud had sided with the king in his struggles against the archbishop, and to demonstrate their support, had cut off the tail of Becket's horse as he passed through the town. The saint's fame quickly spread throughout the Norman world. The first holy image of Becket is thought to be a mosaic icon still visible in Monreale Cathedral, in Sicily, created shortly after his death. Becket's cousins obtained refuge at the Sicilian court during his exile, and King William II of Sicily wed a daughter of Henry II. The principal church of the Sicilian city of Marsala is dedicated to Saint Thomas Becket. Over 45 medieval chas reliquaries decorated in Champlever copyright enamel showing similar scenes from Becket's life survive, including the Becket casket in London. Legacy: Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales is set in a company of pilgrims on their way from Southwark to the shrine of Saint Thomas Becket in Canterbury Cathedral. The story of Becket's life became a popular theme for the medieval Nottingham alabaster carvers. One set of Becket panels is displayed in the Victoria and Albert Museum. In 1884, England's poet laureate Alfred, Lord Tennyson wrote Becket, a play about Thomas Becket and Henry II. Modern works based on the story of Thomas Becket include T.S. Eliot's play Murder in the Cathedral, Jean Anouilh's play Becket, which was made into a movie with the same title, and Paul Webb's play Four Nights in Knaresborough. Webb has adapted his play for the screen and sold the rights to Harvey and Bob Weinstein. The struggle between churches and king's power is a theme of Ken Follett's novel The Pillars of the Earth, of which one of the last scenes features the murder of Thomas Becket. The Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, a non-profit, non-partisan, interfaith, legal and educational institute dedicated to protecting the free expression of all religious traditions, took its inspiration and namesake from Thomas Becket. In a 2006 poll by BBC History magazine for Worst Britain of the previous millennium, Becket came second behind Jack the Ripper. The poll was dismissed as daft in The Guardian, and the result disputed by Anglicans and Catholics. Historians had nominated one person per century, and for the 12th century John Hudson chose Becket for being greedy, hypocritical, founder of gesture politics, and master of the soundbite. The magazine editor suggested most other nominees were too obscure for voters, as well as saying, in an era when thumbscrews, racks and burning alive could be passed off as robust law and order, being guilty of gesture politics might seem something of a minor charge. There are many churches named after Thomas Becket's in Great Britain, including Church of Saint Thomas the Martyr, Monmouth, Saint Thomas of Becket Church, Pensford, Saint Thomas of Becket Church, Widcombe, Church of Saint Thomas of Becket, Cape, Saint Thomas the Martyr, Bristol and Saint Thomas the Martyr's Church, Oxford and in France, including a Permil-Glise Saint Thomas de Canterbury copywriter Wyatt Mont Saint Aignan, a Permil-Glise Saint Thomas Becket at Gravelines, a Permil-Glise Saint Thomas Becket at Avreux, a Permil-Glise Saint Thomas Becket at Bar copyright Nodé, etc. Notes. Citations. References. Further reading, Biographies, Duggan, Anne, Thomas Becket, London, O'Donnell. Guy, John. Thomas Becket, Warrior, Priest, Rebel 424 pages, Knowles, David, Thomas Becket, London, Adam and Charles Black. Historiography, Duggan, Anne, Thomas Becket, A Textual History of His Letters, Oxford, Clarendon Press. Duggan, Anne, The Correspondence of Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury to Bar Currency NDE, Lat. /Engel, Oxford, Clarendon Press. External links, Edward Grimer Unregistered Trademark S account of the murder of Thomas Becket at Internet History Sourcebooks Project, Becket's Bits, photographs and locations of 20 of the surviving medieval Limoges enamel chassis for relics of Becket.